We are a concerned generation. Heck, we're a concerned population. How on earth are we expected to feel safe enough to raise children in this world? More than 2/3 of humanity now live in countries where fertility rates has fallen below the level needed for a stable population. The conversation around population decline is a large and complicated one. And just pushing out babies is not as simple as the billionaires think it is. We also can't simply label the current childbearing portion of the population as lazy and selfish. Imposing laws and regulations to try force people to have children so that we can bulk up the future working population doesn't seem to be a great solution either. And sorry, finance people, I'm going to show you how the concerns over dropping fertility rates could have more to do with social media impacts than finances. Not to mention the total global crisis it feels like we're currently in. Buckle up, people. I hope you're ready. At the end of this video, I'm going to try dig us out of the hellhole I'm about to put us all in, because surprisingly, there is a light at the end of the tunnel if you squint your eyes and look really hard. Childcare for 2 children, which is what is needed to maintain a population, costs more than rent in all 50 American states, which is insane considering the current cost of housing. In some parts of Europe, hostels are becoming ever so popular, as renting a bed that includes water, electricity, Wi-Fi, and heating for 20 euros a night equates to 600 euros a month. This is coming out to be cheaper than renting an apartment, while the cost of childcare in many parts of Europe ranges from 750 euros to 1,000 euros per month for 3 days a week. When childcare costs start to rise higher than rental prices, it seems like there might be a problem. This is the case for around 2/3 of families in the UK, and it has led to 43% of mothers considering leaving their job as their entire salaries go into childcare costs. The UK has some of the highest childcare costs in the world, but it's not at the top of the list. New Zealand, Cyprus, Ireland, Switzerland, Australia, Netherlands, and Canada are up there too. The birth rate decline is much sharper in East Asia than any other region, as cost of living skyrockets over there. Africa, you're doing alright. But declining birth rates are being seen in Latin American countries too, as women feel as though the jobs they depend on to survive are at risk if they fall pregnant. How is Gen Z realistically expected to have kids when children have become so expensive and adults can barely afford to look after themselves? Some governments are increasingly recognizing the importance of providing affordable childcare, but their efforts can lead to the crisis we saw in Canada with their $10 a day childcare system that some argue has failed the nation. While parents are offered affordable childcare, teachers are experiencing wage drops while their classrooms are crammed and their support cut short, essentially leading to a debate over quantity versus quality. So yes, child rearing today looks significantly different to what it looked 30 years ago, and it is changing and morphing as we speak. Millennial and Gen Z couples who want to have children have significantly less opportunity to do so than the boomers and to a degree Gen X had. This is fact, but it's not always about money. Today, we're truly seeing the effect social media has on our perception of reality and how the constant bombardment of information is shaping our decision making. From influencers making children look like luxury items due to overspending for clout, to the total distrust we have in the government and the safety of our nations, I'd beg to question, even if we had the money, do we really want to bring children into this mess? And we haven't even brought up the environmental concerns many modern thinkers take into consideration when they think about having children. Honestly, the trend around population decline has been a trend for over 2 centuries. And I'm going to use the West, mainly America, as a case study to explain how children have moved from an economic necessity to an economic burden, as the world rightfully shifts into trying to abolish child labor. But this shift away from child labor has had an impact that we cannot ignore. So please, boomers, have some mercy. Your parents came from families that had children contributing to the household funds, which, as wrong as that was, it was an economic structure that gave y'all an upper hand in a weird and convoluted way. And you can no longer say, oh, but back then there was war and famine, because Gen Z and Gen Alpha are edging real close to understanding those experiences. In the industrial age, which broadly ended around 1950, not that long ago. And just to keep another date in mind, World War II ended in 1945. With all the men out fighting the war, children were an economic necessity for families to survive, and there were no laws protecting children as young as 5 years old from going to work. In fact, in 1918, the USA Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional to try and protect children from having to participate in the labor force. The government fully understood that national power relied on having children within the working force. Get this, Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton stated that children who would otherwise be idle could become a source of cheap labor. So yes, politicians have always been full of shit. But over time, countries began introducing laws to protect children from physical labor. Around the same period that these laws started rolling out, societies were moving out of the industrial era and into a more technological and service-based economy. As work shifted into offices and institutions, income increasingly depended on adult cognitive labor rather than family physical labor that included the work of children. This coincided with the expansion of formal education and the idea that schooling and eventually higher education was not only optional but now a necessity. I'd like to remind you that this was all happening in the mid-90s. It really wasn't that long ago if you think about it. Only in the early to mid-90s, children were no longer expected to contribute economically. They were expected to go to school. When we imagine the historical middle class, we imagine low wages, but we imagine families being able to survive on this. That gives us the perception that something was working back then. But what we forget is that children were earning wages too. Low wages, but wages nonetheless. A working household once meant parents and children contributing to the funds. Now, in most Western and modern societies, children don't earn their first paycheck until they've left school. Children have shifted from being economic contributors, essentially paying for themselves to be alive, to children being economic dependents on adults as they are today. And that changes how many children you are able to have. I read a quote that said, as soon as people started moving away from the land and into the cities, children moved from being a helping hand to an extra mouth to feed. This quote to me summarizes the perception of children and parenthood today. They are no longer a necessity, they are a choice based off of our ability to provide. And while it may sound like the solution to this problem is to allow children to work, although it may explain why nothing is being done about influencers using their children to earn a paycheck, I am not advocating for childhood labor. It's just a simple fact that when children became a financial burden on adults, we simply slow down on having them. And honestly, this is where I want to put my opinion here. It's not research, it's just some food for thought. This only becomes a crisis in a society that values money over people. In a world where survival depends almost entirely on wages and productivity, children become a financial risk instead of a shared responsibility. Where childcare, food, and support were shared more naturally and equally, childcare might not feel so expensive and isolating. We are in an interesting time where it feels like for the first time, wealthier people are having more children and lower income earners are deciding to have fewer children. We are in that overlap where it truly is hard to put our finger on the trend, because at the same time, there are still large groups of people today who have children out of necessity. But for the most part, it's within communities that we now deem extremely poor and Mormon influences. The truth is, if you're sitting here on YouTube and you have an Instagram account and a TikTok account and you somewhat keep up with world events, you're living in a city or in a suburb where you have to drive an overpriced car that uses overpriced gas to get to a low-paying job that you're not even sure you'll have next year, that barely pays enough to cover overpriced food, and you're thinking that paying for Netflix this month feels a bit steep, you're probably in the subset of people who feels like having a child right now might be just out of reach for you financially. But as I said, it's not always all about money. Social media has played a significant role in our emotional perception of having children. More than ever, we're bombarded with the image of others living better than we do. We constantly feel like we're just not there yet. So even if realistically you had the money to raise a child, we're now seeing people live the grandest of lives on our social media feeds and comparing our lives to the top 1% of the content that makes it onto our For You pages. For most of human human history, we only compared ourselves to the group of people we actually lived around. Family, friends, neighbors, and co-workers we actually saw during the day. People who had the same advantages and disadvantages we had. That is what psychologist Leon Festinger meant by social comparison. But social media has blown that completely out the window. This phenomenon basically doesn't exist anymore. Now we don't compare ourselves to a few close peers, but rather we compare ourselves to millions of people across different countries, incomes, and life stages, all presented at their most successful and their most polished. So the baseline for what feels normal is constantly moving upwards. If you can even imagine owning a home today, it doesn't feel like stability. A steady job doesn't feel secure anymore. Even if a job is objectively secure, through social media, we're constantly seeing how terrible the job market is at the moment, and we compare the experience of those we see online with our own. And right now, no one truly feels secure in their job. That pressure from social media doesn't just affect the way we feel, it affects the way we make decisions. Because when the world looks richer, safer, and more prepared than we feel, waiting feels responsible. Even if historically, people raise children with significantly less than what we have now. Only now, the world does not feel richer, safer, or more prepared in any way. The age of information for the first time in history has allowed us to be aware of everything. We now know just how fragile the economy really is. Every stat that points to raising costs and lower wages hits the media front lines. We have totally lost trust in world leaders. Remember this guy who said that idle kids should work? How many people in the population do you think in the 1700s knew that he actually said that? Now, every outlandish thing a politician says is on our trending pages. Impending wars were easy to ignore if you just didn't read the newspaper. Now, we cannot escape the reality that our world leaders are literally starting wars and causing mass devastation. Having this information is objectively a good thing, but we cannot deny the cognitive effects it has on our decisions to start raising families. When everybody wakes up to the news that schools have been bombed, can we really imagine having daughters? When we read about young boys committing suicide because an AI chatbot told him to, can we really imagine having sons? And then with every influencer telling us how to raise our babies, from gentle parenting to estranged families, do we really feel like we are capable of raising well-rounded and resilient children that we're not going to cause long-lasting emotional trauma on? The world has always been a scary place, but we didn't always know every grueling detail. We can't escape that our world feels like an awful place. Now, to get a little bit darker, and then I promise I'm going to try and pick us up off the floor and out of the misery puddle I've put us all into, the billionaire powerhouses are seemingly not wanting to do anything about this, and that has left us feeling hopeless. The world is crying out over the devastation that AI has caused. It seems like for the most part, people don't want AI. People want their jobs back. People want electricity bills to go down, not up. We have been crying out over environmental damage for years now. And what do? Build more data centers and poison more water and roll out more systems that are taking more jobs. They create AI pornography that allows AI systems to remove the clothing off of anything that you upload onto these sites. And most recently, deploying AI systems into the DOW. Thanks, Sam. Local communities living around big corporate farming lots have been crying out over the devastation of their land for years now. Yet they continue to poison our food and charge us even more for it. All while they pursue their ambitions at all cost. And then they have the gall to call us lazy and selfish for not having children. Selfish for not contributing to a future of lemmings to do their bidding. So now they panic. Governments are scrambling to try and plumpen up our population. Elon endorsed the idea of taking away voting rights from people without children, stating that the childless have little stake in the future. I wonder if then the childless should pay less tax. And it seems like they're not offering these solutions to get people to enjoy the basic desire for family and community. It really does seem as though they only care about having more people in the future to pay for their products, services, and tax. They have made it harder than ever for us to provide for children in a clean, safe, and healthy environment. Yet they desperately want us to have children anyways. People are getting into debilitating amounts of medical debt. And now they have to consider the medical costs around childbirth. And we haven't even touched on how birth control was enforced on women who are fertile for only a fraction of the time that men are, putting hormones into women who already have a limited childbearing age as opposed to men, and then blaming women for waiting too long. All while IVF has grown into a $50 billion industry owned by men. I'm not bashing men here. I love my man. I have incredible men in my life. But really, it seems like there are a lot of men out there that has truly gone and stuffed up this world. There is hope though. In an age where information is at our fingertips, it does allow us to identify these problems. And the first step into finding solutions is to identify that there is a problem. And while this time feels so heavy and loud, it is part of the process of finding solutions. Gen Z and Gen Alpha, you are more important than you realize, and hopefully your struggles will not be for naught. Influencer culture is falling apart as we know it. People are actively rejecting influencers who do nothing but promote their own wealth through pushing people to spend unnecessarily and practice in overconsumption. We are becoming more aware of the effects that social media comparison has on us mentally. And in 2026, we're seeing a huge shift away from digital and into more of an analog use of technology as people start valuing screen time less and FaceTime more. People are boycotting ChatGPT due to their recent deal with the Department of War, and Anthropic has seen the fastest growth in AI history due to their decision to stick to their morals. This support for Anthropic by the people shows that standing up for your morals is not lost to us as a population, and that we will stand up for what we believe in. In 2018, it took only 3 hours for a federal jury to decide that the world's largest pork producer should pay $473.5 million to neighbors of 3 North Carolina industrial scale hog farms for unreasonable nuisances the local community had to experience for years. It's a small feat, and there are still people out there suffering due to the negative impacts of industrial farming, but it is a step in the right direction. These pig farms are owned by China, just by the way. Do with that what you will. And this guy, I don't even know what to say. But hopefully the pain and suffering of today will lead to a better future. The age of information has made it harder for politicians to hide their nefarious actions and behaviors, and hopefully that will provide people with a foundation to make clearer decisions on whom they put in power. But if you want us to have children, give us a world we would want them to be in. And if you gained anything from this video, please do subscribe to this channel. I have a lot more on the way, and I thoroughly enjoy exploring the mistakes of the world with all of you so that we can hopefully move into a better future.